The morning of my son's grand opening, I put on the gray suit I hadn't worn since my wife's funeral. Patricia picked it out for me 3 years before she passed. Said it made me look distinguished. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, straightened the tie, and told myself today was going to be a good day. I drove 40 minutes to downtown Nashville, parked in the garage across from the building, and walked toward the glass entrance with a small card in my breast pocket. Inside was a note I'd written the night before. Just a few lines. Something a father says to a son on a day like this. I never got to give it to him. My daughter-in-law was standing near the entrance in a white blazer, clipboard in hand, talking to 2 women I didn't recognize. When she saw me walking up the steps, something crossed her face. Not surprise, not warmth, something closer to inconvenience. She stepped away from the 2 women and came toward me before I could reach the door. "Walter," she said, keeping her voice low. "I thought Marcus talked to you." I stopped. "Talk to me about what?" She glanced over her shoulder at the people inside, then back at me. "About today not being the right fit. We have investors here, media contacts. This is a professional event, and we really need to keep the energy focused." I looked past her through the glass. I could see my son Marcus on the other side of the room, shaking hands with a man in a dark suit. He hadn't seen me yet. "I'm his father," I said. "I know that," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And there will be plenty of other chances to celebrate with him. But today just isn't the right time." There were people on the steps behind me. 2 men in suits stopped to wait. A photographer with a lanyard around his neck paused, looking at us. An assistant held the door open, watching. I stood there for a moment. The card in my breast pocket felt like it weighed 10 pounds. Then I said, "All right, Diane." I turned around and walked back down the steps. I didn't look back. I kept my shoulders straight, the way my father taught me, and I walked to my car. I sat behind the wheel for a long time before I started the engine. Long enough that the parking garage got quiet around me. Then I drove home. Let me back up. Because you need to understand what the past 6 years looked like before you can understand what happened next. Marcus is my only son. I also have a daughter, but Marcus was always the one who reminded me of myself. Same stubbornness. Same appetite for working hard and building something from nothing. I recognized it in him when he was 12 years old, sitting at the kitchen table drawing blueprints for a business that sold handmade birdhouses to neighbors. He was never going to work for someone else his whole life. I knew that then. When his mother was alive, she used to joke that the 2 of us were the same person split into different decades. She wasn't wrong. Patricia passed from a stroke 4 years ago. It was fast. Too fast. One morning she was here, and by that evening she wasn't. And the world rearranged itself into something I didn't recognize for a long time after. Marcus handled it differently than I did. He threw himself into work. That was how he processed grief. I understood that, because it was how I processed things too, when I was his age. About a year after Patricia died, Marcus came to me with a plan. He'd been working in commercial real estate for 8 years, had good contacts, good instincts, and he wanted to start his own firm, boutique, focused on mid-market commercial properties in the Southeast. He had a name, a logo, a business plan he'd put together himself. All he needed was capital to get started. I didn't hesitate. I'd been holding onto a piece of land in Franklin for 20 years, bought it when prices were low, always told myself I'd develop it someday. Instead, I sold it. After taxes and fees, I walked away with a little over $230,000. I gave Marcus $200,000 of it. We didn't do a formal loan agreement. He was my son. Patricia would have done the same thing without blinking. I told him it was an investment in his future, and I meant it. Diane came into the picture about 8 months later. She was in marketing, sharp and put together, and Marcus clearly loved her. I wanted to like her. I tried to like her. But there were small things. The way she redirected conversations when I was in the middle of a thought. The way she'd answer questions I'd asked Marcus before he had a chance to respond. The comments she made, always dressed up as compliments, that left a slight sting when you turned them over. "Walter, you're so salt of the earth," she said once at dinner, and I couldn't explain to anyone exactly why that bothered me, but it did. After they got married, I started to notice shifts in Marcus, slow ones. The kind you don't see clearly when you're in the middle of them. He stopped calling on Sunday mornings, which had been our routine for years. He missed my birthday 1 year, not the party, just the day itself. No call, no text until late that evening, and the message felt like it had been drafted by someone else. Formal, careful. When I mentioned it to him gently, he told me I was being sensitive, said I needed to understand that he was building something and it required all of him right now, I backed off. I told myself it was a season, and seasons change. The firm grew. It grew faster than either of us expected. Marcus had a gift for this. Within 3 years, he had 12 employees, 2 satellite offices, and a reputation that was starting to reach beyond Tennessee. I was proud of him. Every time I saw his name in a local business publication, I'd clip it and put it in a drawer, the same way Patricia used to do. But I saw him less and less. Family dinners became quarterly, then occasional, then dependent entirely on Diane's schedule. When I visited their house, I noticed I was always being received rather than welcomed. There's a difference. One means they opened the door. The other means they were glad you came. The grand opening was supposed to be different. Marcus called me 3 weeks before to tell me about it. He said the firm was opening a flagship office in downtown Nashville, and they were making an event of it. Press, investors, clients. He sounded excited in a way I hadn't heard in a long time. He said, "Pop, you should be there. You helped make this happen." I wrote those words down. I kept them on a notepad on my kitchen counter. You helped make this happen. I bought a new tie. I had my suit dry cleaned. The night before, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote that note, the one I put in my breast pocket, telling him that his mother would have been standing taller than anyone in that room. And then Diane met me at the door. I got home around noon. The house was quiet. I set my keys on the counter, poured a glass of water, and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard. Patricia had a garden back there. I never replanted it after she passed, just kept the beds cleared. I stood there for about 20 minutes. Then I sat down, picked up my phone, and called my attorney. Her name is Sandra Kowalski. I've known her for 15 years. She handled my real estate transactions, my will, Patricia's estate. She picked up on the second ring. I told her what happened. Just the facts, the way you'd present them to anyone. The money I'd given Marcus 6 years ago. The handshake agreement. No promissory note. No formal loan documents. Then what happened this morning? Sandra listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Walter," she said, "you know that without documentation, recovering that money in court would be complicated." "I know," I said, "but complicated isn't the same as impossible. Do you have anything in writing? Texts? Emails? Anything where Marcus acknowledged the transfer and its purpose?" I thought back. He sent me an email when the money cleared, thanked me, said he'd pay me back every cent once the firm was stable. "Forward me that email," she said, "and anything else you can find. I'll review what we have." I also called my accountant. I had 3 accounts that carried Marcus as a secondary contact set up years ago as a convenience, in case something ever happened to me. I had those removed that afternoon. I didn't do it in anger. I want to be clear about that. I did it the way you'd patch a leak in a roof, calmly, because it needed to be done. Then I changed into comfortable clothes and spent the rest of the afternoon in the backyard. Marcus called at 6:47 that evening. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 7:15, then at 7:40. Then Diane called once, a number I almost didn't recognize. I let that one go too. At 8:20, Marcus sent a text. "Pop, I need to talk to you. Please call me back." At 9:05, another text. I didn't know she was going to do that. I swear I didn't know. I put the phone face down on the coffee table and watched the evening news. The next morning, I was on my second cup of coffee when my daughter called. Her name is Renee. She lives in Knoxville, teaches high school history, and has the clearest eyes of anyone I've ever known. She called not because Marcus had contacted her. She called because she'd seen a photo from the grand opening on Instagram and noticed I wasn't in any of them. "Dad," she said carefully, "are you okay?" I told her what happened. All of it, including the part about the attorney, the accounts, the email. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "Did Marcus know she was going to do that?" "He says he didn't." "Do you believe him?" I thought about it honestly. I believe he's telling the truth about not knowing the exact words she would say. Whether he knew she'd find a way to keep me away from that event that I'm less sure about. Renee exhaled slowly. "What do you need from me right now?" "Nothing," I said. "I just needed you to know." Marcus came to the house 2 days later. He came alone, which I noticed. He rang the bell instead of using the spare key he'd had for years, which I also noticed. I opened the door and stood aside to let him in. He looked tired. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago when he'd called me, sounding like himself again, telling me I should be there. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I used to help him with math homework. The same table where Patricia used to spread out her garden catalogs in February, planning what she'd plant in spring. He started talking before I'd said a word. He told me Diane had mentioned to him, the week before the event, that she was concerned about the optics of having family present at what was meant to be a purely professional event. He said he'd told her he disagreed, and that he'd assumed the matter was settled. He said he didn't know she'd taken it upon herself to position herself at the entrance until he saw me through the glass, walking back down the steps. "Why didn't you come after me?" I asked. He looked at the table. I was in the middle of a conversation with a potential investor. By the time I stepped away, your car was already gone. I nodded. "Pop, I'm sorry. I should have called you that day. I should have walked out of that building and called you right then." "Yes," I said. "You should have." He looked up. "Sandra Kowalski's office called me yesterday." "I know. You're serious about this." "Marcus," I said, "I sold a piece of land your grandfather helped me buy. I gave you $200,000 because I believed in what you were building, and because your mother would have wanted me to. I was at that building to stand in a room full of strangers and be proud of you in front of every single one of them." I paused. And I was turned away at the door. He put both hands flat on the table. His jaw was tight. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "I want you to understand what happened," I said. "Not just apologize for it, understand it. We talked for 2 hours. It wasn't easy and it wasn't clean. There were parts of that conversation where the table between us felt wider than it actually was. He told me things about the pressure he'd been feeling, the way building the firm had cost him more than he'd let on, the way he'd let other voices become louder than they should have been. I told him things too. About the Sundays he stopped calling. The birthday. The feeling of being received instead of welcomed. At some point, he said, "I think I've been trying to keep 2 different worlds separate, and I told myself it was for practical reasons. But I think part of it was that I let her tell me this story often enough that I started to believe it." "What story?" He hesitated. "That you and she couldn't both be in my corner at the same time." I sat with that for a moment. "That's not a choice you ever have to make," I said. "But it's one you've been making, and I need you to see that clearly." He nodded, not quickly, the way people nod when they want the conversation to end. Slowly, the way they nod when something is landing. "I want to tell you what I told him next, because I think it matters. I didn't tell him to leave Diane. I didn't issue ultimatums or demand apologies from her in my presence, or make a list of conditions the way you'd negotiate a contract. I'm not built that way. And more importantly, that wasn't the point. The point was this. I spent 40 years building something too. Not a business, a family. I poured everything I had into it, my time, my savings, my presence, every weekend and holiday, and ordinary Tuesday evening. I was there for the fevers and the school plays and the arguments about curfews and the long drives back from college when the car was packed too full and we had to stop twice. I was there when his mother was sick, and I was there when she was gone. And in the years since, I have tried, quietly and without complaint, to remain available to my son while giving him room to build the life he wanted. What I would not do, what I told him plainly I would not do, was make myself smaller so that someone else could feel larger. I would not apologize for showing up. I would not disappear from my own son's story to make the narrative neater for people who didn't earn the right to write it. He listened to all of it. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I don't want you to disappear from anything." "Then act like it," I said. That was 4 months ago. Things are different now. Not perfect different. Marcus calls on Sunday mornings again. It started about 3 weeks after that conversation, and I didn't make a comment about it, just answered the phone. We've had dinner twice, the 3 of us, and those dinners have been careful and a little formal, like furniture rearranged in a room you're still learning to move through. I don't expect Diane and I will ever be close. I'm not sure that's necessary. What is necessary, and what I'm watching for, is whether my son remains the man I raised him to be. So far, he is trying. That counts for something. Sandra is still working on the loan documentation. Marcus retained his own attorney, and they're working out the terms to formalize the agreement. It may take another few months. I'm not in a hurry. The money was never the point anyway. The documentation is about clarity, not punishment. You write things down not because you don't trust someone, but because trust shouldn't have to carry the whole weight alone. The card I wrote the night before the grand opening is still in my breast pocket. I haven't thrown it away. Someday, maybe, I'll give it to him. When the moment is right. It says, "Your mother would have been standing taller than anyone in that room today. So would I. We always have been. I'm 63 years old. I've buried a wife, rebuilt myself from grief, watched my children grow into people I don't entirely recognize sometimes, and learned, slowly and at some cost, that Love without boundaries isn't love, it's just permission. You can love your children and still require them to treat you with basic dignity. You can forgive someone and still let the consequences of what they did stand. You can open your arms to your son and still look him in the eye and say, "This cannot happen again." I stood at that door in my gray suit, and I walked back down those steps with my shoulders straight. I did not make a scene. I did not call him out in front of his investors. I did not do the dramatic thing, because drama was never what this was about. I went home, I made a phone call, I let the morning come, and when my son sat across from me at that kitchen table and asked what I wanted him to do, I told him the truth. I don't want your guilt. I don't want your money back. I want you to understand what you almost let happen, and I want you to choose differently going forward. That's what fathers do. We teach, even when the lesson costs us. Especially then. If this story hits something in you, share it. Someone out there needs to hear that it's possible to hold your ground and keep your heart open at the same time. Hit that subscribe button and stay with us. There's more to come.